and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome to Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs. You're back with the three ecclesiastical musketeers for our 100th episode. Daniel and Tom, congratulations. You've made it to 100.
And we're still friends.
Are we? I don't even know you.
Who are you?
Who's this person? Well, Jamie, I think really congratulations to you, isn't it? Because you've done all 100. Daniel and I have skipped in and out here and there, you know,
Wow.
taking our time off when we want to. But you've been the consistent beard of Irreverend.
Yeah, I have had a beard the whole time. So if anything, that's the thing I want to be remembered for. Somebody commented a while ago, Jamie, your beard is looking positively orthodox. Trim it back or shave it off at once. And I thought, you're at it's sort of a strange stage in life, isn't it? When you're making a podcast and you're kind of, a lot of your sort of interaction with other human beings is from strangers on the internet making comments about, you know, the length of your beard. So, you know, that's the space I'm inhabiting at the moment. But chaps, you may, this is a very special episode for all sorts of reasons. We've got Peter Hitchens coming up imminently, but you may have noticed something about my attire, as indeed may viewers have noticed also. I am indeed modeling our merchandise, and I'll just sit up a little bit. You can see the t-shirt I'm wearing as well. They go Reverend Faith and Current Affairs. I'm wearing the cap, the t-shirt, and if I may, I'm going to show you our graphic designer Jonathan's brilliant design on the back of this t-shirt. So here we go. Tell me if you can see it. Is that good?
That's good, Jamie. We're now up a bit. Up more.
Yeah.
More, even more. A significant amount up, Jamie.
Yeah.
Just about.
Yeah, there.
No,
Faith,
there we go.
not fear.
Faith, not fear. Yeah.
On the back of the t-shirt, apologies to all the audio listeners there, but basically our merch is out. And also I've got this lovely mug and I'm drinking a cup of decaf tea from it. I'm not going to be dressed like this every episode, by the way, just from now on. I think it would be over the top, but I wanted to show everyone the merchandise because from Friday morning of this week, which I think is November the 4th, merchandise is going live on the website to buy. So irreverendpods.com. The merch is finally available. It took us a while to sort of work out how to do it on our website, but we've got a genius, child genius. I don't know. He's probably not. He might be technically a child. He's sort of 17, Seb, who helps us with our website, but he's a genius and he's worked it out and it's going to work. So
it's worth saying, you know, why on earth would I buy these things off these people? You know, these lovely products. I want that mug actually. I might buy one. Might buy
these
couple.
mugs. I should say, chaps, you can have these. You can have some for free.
Really?
Yeah,
that's very kind.
I think that's only fair. Since you help make the podcast.
I wasn't expecting that. That's very generous. But why do we need the money? Well, it helps us with all sorts of things. It helps us with.
Well, it helps us to reimburse the cost of the merchandise.
Yeah, we need to sell it now. But the small amount of profit we make on it will be going towards things like server costs. We're going towards the running costs of the podcast. It will go towards large events. Jamie.
Yes,
what sort of large event do we have?
Yeah, well, we have very exciting.
Drum roll.
Exciting. Yes. So don't get ahead of yourself, but we're gonna announce this now so that we can whet your appetite. But the tickets won't be going on sale until we've sorted out everything sort of formally. But essentially, having said all that, we have a live event in the diary now, the 4th of February. So Saturday, 4th of February, and our special guest is going to be the one and only Rod Dreher. Yeah. He's going to be joining us, and it will be in London. We are hoping that our booking at the I think it's called the Steiner Theatre, but I think it's been rebranded as the Marylebone Theatre. I can never pronounce that word. That's going to be the venue. So we haven't got that all sort of signed in the dotted line, but we've sort of put down a marker for that weekend, and they're free and everything. So London, 4th of February, Rod Dreher. Watch this space, but that is going to happen at some point. Well, at that point, specifically that point.
We'll let you know when.
What I mean is the tickets will go on sale at some point.
Yeah. We'll let you know, obviously, when to do that. How many seats are there, Jamie? Do you happen to know?
I'm not entirely sure. It's sort of it's a bit bigger than the venue we had last time. So I think it's sort of 200, 250 seats or something.
That'd be great, wouldn't it? It'd be such a great feeling. So
it's going to be awesome.
It's going to be good. Yeah,
I can't wait. So one more thing before we air our interview with P Hitch, as I call him now that we're best friends. Yeah, we did the interview last night, and I think it's fair to say that it's fairly intense, but we won't comment too much on it until we've aired it. But if you enjoy this episode, please subscribe. You may be new because you're thinking, well, I'd like to hear from Peter Hitchens, but who are these incredibly insightful and erudite vicars from the Church of England commenting on current affairs? Well, it's us, Irreverend Faith and Current Affairs. Please subscribe to us if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you are somebody who listens on a podcast, then look at your chosen podcatcher app and find the subscribe button, and please subscribe and join us on this wonderful journey through faith and current affairs. And of course, share the podcast with your friends. Just retweet it right now. Did you get it from Twitter? Retweet it. How long does it take to press the retweet button? Not long at all. You could even write a little review and say, oh, I like this episode. Or, oh, this episode was quite good. Or this episode was average. Or this episode made me think, etc., etc. But please do subscribe and share, because it makes such a big difference. Having said that, I think, chaps, now we should air this interview with Peter Hitchens. He appeared to be broadcasting from a garden shed. So
in Oxfordshire.
Live
from a garden shed in Oxfordshire.
From a bunker. So having said that, here we go. We present to you the one and only Mr. Peter Hitchens. Well, I'm delighted to say that we are privileged with the virtual presence of Mr. Peter Hitchens on Irreverend Faith and Current Affairs. Peter, if I may, you've been somewhat of an inspiration to this podcast, writing and speaking about things that other people fear to, and that we speak about on this podcast. So it's a privilege to have you, as I say. Thank you for giving us some of your time.
Well, I hope I live up to that rather exaggerated billing.
Well, do you know what, Peter? Once I think you wrote in your blog about you wished something about curates using the 1662 Book of Common Prayer marriage service. And as a young curate, I'd never done it. And it just made me think, well, maybe I should try that. And the next time I did one, I said to this couple, very working class, lovely couple, and I said, well, would you like to try the 1662 service? I gave it to them, and they immediately said, that's the one we want. And you'll be pleased to know, the first 1662 marriage service in Poole in years and years, I suspect, was done on your influence. So there's one.
I'm pleased about that, but of course sad that there should have been such a long gap before. I'd be amazed, actually, if anybody, particularly at that extraordinarily important moment in life, introduced to it, was not so moved by its beauty that they would immediately want to use it. It's quite extraordinary. There's nothing really like it. There's a wonderful description in the Patrick O'Brien books, the Captain Aubrey books, of a marriage conducted by a naval captain, and the power of the beauty of the words on that occasion is very well described. You just take over everybody present.
Yes.
I now use the preface in the prayer book for as part of the marriage application form. So they, it's page 2 of what they read.
Yes, well, it doesn't really leave much out.
Yeah. Proving the perennial relevance of the Book of Common Prayer. Another salient theme of this podcast. Peter, before we go too far down the liturgical rabbit hole, can we take you back a couple of years to the beginning of the COVID situation? Peter, I'm interested to know, when did you first start having doubts about the response to COVID? Was it straight away? Was it a process? Can you talk us through your
one of those John Wyndham novels, The Day of the Triffids and all the rest of it, where everything starts with something apparently laughable going on, a film of moving plants and people all laughing at it in the newsreels, and then the next thing you know, the world has come to an end. I have to say that when the first reports of it started coming in, I didn't take it particularly seriously. But as soon as I noticed all around me people beginning to panic, I thought there'd be a severe loss of proportion. The moment when there was an evening when I particularly became aware of this, and it was I went to see a film, which I used often to do, and I don't do so much anymore for a variety of reasons, which was called Military Wives. It's quite fun. The thing was, I went to the cinema in Oxford, where I often go, And Mrs. Hitchens and I were half the audience. There were two other people there, and they sat a very long way away from us. And this was what would normally be a fairly busy weekend evening in North Oxford. And I thought, there is a madness abroad. And then on our way home, we went past an Italian restaurant, which sometimes uses it. The staff were in a state of terrible panic, saying, "Oh, have you heard what's happening in Italy? There are millions dying." So I said, "Well, no, actually, I have heard what's happening in Italy, and that is an exaggeration. What is more, it's quite plain that it affects principally very old people with quite severe conditions. It doesn't make it harmless, but it's not what it's being." The thing which astonished me, when I said this, they didn't want to know. There was an actual desire, I think, among many people to believe that some sort of apocalypse was upon us. And that was really, I suppose, something like 10 days from the start. And then when I came home from work and Johnson went on the television and told us all to stay at home for the rest of our lives, then I knew for certain that we had seriously come off the rails.
Were you surprised that not very many, or well, hardly any of your journalistic colleagues were even slightly skeptical about what was going on? You seemed right at the beginning to be really a lone voice in the mainstream
media. I was
media.
not surprised so much as annoyed. I noticed for some time that on issues of particularly of liberty, people who I would have thought would have instinctively have stood up against various security frenzies. You remember during the Blair government, they were constantly increasing the amount of time people could be held without trial and all kinds of other horrible things of that kind, and wanting to introduce identity cards. And I did find it slightly alarming then, because it was a surprise to me how few people would stand up to be counted against that sort of thing. So I already knew that on issues of liberty, most people were actually not particularly engaged, didn't see it as a threat. So I wasn't surprised. I was annoyed because it seemed to me people weren't using their critical faculties. They were just swallowing what they were being told and not even bothering to make inquiries. And there were a few obvious exceptions who came out during time. There's some fantastically important experts who began to speak. But in general, I thought, oh, come on. The whole point of journalism is to be skeptical, which is what I was brought up to believe. But I came to the conclusion in the end that people were no longer brought up to believe that, didn't believe it. In many cases, actually wanted to be mouthpieces of authority. And if they want to be, then nothing you can say will interest them. So I thought, okay, well, lone voice it is. Here we go again. It wasn't a new experience for me.
Is the mainstream media dead, Peter? Many people have lost faith in the mainstream media or the corporate media or whatever you want to call it.
They're not dead, but they are significantly less powerful than they used to be. Beyond doubt, there are many other rivals to them, and the print newspapers, which used to be incredibly important and powerful, are now much less so. Here's an example. When I joined the Daily Express, which was then a serious major newspaper, in January 1997, it sold 2.25 million copies a day. No paper sells anything like that anymore. The really big sellers were selling 4 million. This is gone. The era is over, and the papers are still important and influential, but nothing like on the scale that they used to be.
Is it, if not dead, have they lost moral authority over this, do you think? Or
I think moral authority was ever really the thing, was it? I don't think we ever looked at newspapers as these are great sources of moral authority. But what they were a very important alternative source of opinion and truth from the government, just as the opposition is supposed to be. And the mere existence of them, and particularly because they were various and plural and didn't always agree with each other, the very existence of them created a gap in which a free life was possible. I constantly quote Richard Neville, the editor of Oz in the 1960s, who said, there is an inch of difference between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, but it is in that inch that we all live. The same inch was kept open by the existence of a various and competitive and diverse press. And that's largely gone. I mean, on most of these things, you would find it very hard to find any real difference between the Guardian and the Daily Telegraph over their coverage of COVID. They were just doing the same thing. And my own newspapers were very generous to me in allowing me to say what I said and to dissent. But I suspect that in some other offices, I would not have had that freedom. They didn't agree with me, but they felt that my voice was one which needed to be heard. So they published what I said, to their enormous credit, bless them. But it wasn't that common.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of the others a great deal longer than it should have done to realize that the university that they'd originally taken to was a mistake.
Yeah. Do you think now we're seeing obviously things changing a bit, high profile political figures kind of rowing back on their what seemed to be their position at the time, journalists obviously being a bit more varied in what they're saying about COVID. Do you feel now that you are essentially vindicated in the line you took at the beginning?
Of course I am, because I was right. Even if no one agreed with me, I'd still be vindicated because it's quite clear from everything that can be seen that I read. The simple example of Sweden tells everybody that I was right. They didn't panic, they didn't go wild in the way that we did, didn't shut down their society and their economy, and they were fine. And there are other more complicated examples, but that they're not necessary because the Swedish one shows it. So I'm not bothered about that. No, after any major mistake, you'll find that almost everybody turns out not to have made it. So after the Iraq War, I found that there are lots of people who I seem to remember supporting it had actually been opponents of it. Well, good. I'm very glad. That's what they now think they were doing, but they weren't. Yeah. But this is what happens all the time. Again, I'm used to it. I laugh at it.
So do you then predict, as a further prediction, that soon, and however long, everyone will basically think that the lockdowns were a mistake, and that the mainstream narrative on it will be considered to be a minority position?
I hope so, but I'm afraid that the other ridiculous view that the fault of the British state was that it didn't shut down the country hard enough or fast enough has also taken root among some people. So I don't think we can rely on it. These things never present themselves the second time in the same form as the first. Actually, the Iraq War was quite easy to oppose. You could see that crude lies were being told and that panic was being injected, and it got out of hand, and a lot of people noticed it. The Ukraine war, which to me is as dangerous and unwise, is, on the other hand, much more persuasively couched and has a very large measure of support. And anybody who, like me, displays any skepticism about it is immediately smeared, often quite effectively. So if someone announces that I'm a Putin apologist and that I defend the invasion, neither of which is true, lots of people will believe them, and dissent on that is much harder. What the kind of people who like doing that sort of thing learned from the Iraq War was not don't start stupid wars or don't engender stupid wars. It was be better at it. Yeah. And they would have learned from COVID, be better at frightening the population earlier and more quickly.
What do you see as the legacy in terms of liberty issues from COVID? Have things fundamentally shifted as a result of what's happened?
It's been shifting for a long time. Liberty cannot survive if it's only protected by formal letter of the law protections. I've held in my hands the 1689 Bill of Rights and the scroll of vellum on which it's written, and it's immensely valuable to me, and I trembled as I held it. But the truth is, it can say what it likes, but if nobody knows what it says and nobody cares, it won't be effective. And there is at the moment what I regard as a major breach, both of the Bill of Rights and the key and still living clauses of the Magna Carta, in which a British person is being punished arbitrarily by the government without any kind of due process. And nobody cares.
This is the Ukrainian reporter, isn't it? I believe, I can't remember his name. We have spoken about him.
Graham Phillips, yeah, he's a video blogger. I said he's not particularly to my taste. I wouldn't run to his side if we happened to find each other at the same Foreign Office party, an unlikely event. But there it is. It's not that I like him. It's that what has happened to him is an outrage against all the principles of due process and freedom of speech. And so, apart from the slated Toby Young, who has made an intervention on the subject, there has been, I've raised this several times in my column, and I raise it wherever I can. Nobody wants to join in. I think it's shocking to me. It's quite plain that whether you like him or not, and whatever he's done, he cannot be punished by the state until he's been tried and convicted of a crime, and nothing of that kind has taken place. It's arbitrary punishment. He lives in a combination of a novel by Franz Kafka and a novel by Joseph Heller. He's banned by law from obeying the law. He can't pay his council tax. He's not allowed to pay it. So, it's really, I have to say in this, what I have to spring to the defense of Islington Borough Council, who I pointed out this anomaly to them, and they had been threatening to take him to court, and they withdrew the summons when I pointed out that he couldn't, whatever they did, he couldn't pay them because they could see it ridiculous. But that wasn't necessarily going to happen. It's an illustration of the absurdity. He can't insure his house. He can't pay people. He can't pay his bills. And his attempts to contact the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, or whatever it's called this week, and say, "Excuse me, I'm not sure this is right," are pretty much governed by them. If they feel like replying, they reply. If they don't feel like replying, they don't. There's no one to turn except me, for goodness sake, and that's not much of a protection against arbitrary power. This thing is happening in our midst as I speak. The old Martin Niemöller thing. First they came for the communists, and I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. So, well, it's all very well saying that, but the truth is, here they've come for somebody who nobody likes, and nobody's speaking out.
Do you think, Peter, that the government may find further excuses for lockdowns, for different types of lockdowns, now that the precedent's set?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's entirely possible. But as I say, the problems that we face seldom come in the same guise twice. I don't know what will be the next thing. I'm very worried about this war. I think war is the most irresistible pretext for regimenting and closing debate in society. And I think this war is proving to be that. The spectrum of opinion which one can express is much narrower already. And if the war widens, which I think is a very grave danger, then it will become narrower still. War is the tyrant's friend. It has.
And do you think it's right to say that a lot of blame is being put on the war for things like fuel shortages and hiking up prices?
It's true. There's no question that Europe has inflicted upon itself a major fuel shortage. Well, the Western world, by embarking on a policy towards Russia, 25 years ago, which increased tension. And someone will now say, "Oh, well, there goes Hitchens again, excusing the Russian invasion." And I just say here, because it's essential, I say in every public appearance I make, Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine was a disgusting, lawless, barbaric action. And also, from his own point of view, a deeply mistaken one, which is indefensible. And I don't seek to defend it or excuse it. Nor do I seek to defend or excuse the long, long period of manufactured hostility towards Russia and the isolation of Russia through the expansion of NATO, which was argued against by most of the most distinguished and serious diplomats in the world, starting with George Kennan, the man who won the Cold War, more or less, on the basis that this sort of thing would result from it, and indeed argued against by those Democrats and liberals who still existed in Russia before this really got going. It's been a disastrous policy. Robert Kagan, who is the husband of Victoria Nuland, who works in a senior position at the State Department, is no friend of mine. He's a neoconservative hawk, but he wrote in Foreign Affairs earlier this year that it was not true to say that the war was not provoked. He didn't say that it excused it, but that it was provoked. And even to say this, particularly if you're me rather than Robert Kagan, is to risk being accused of something close to treachery. Lord Haw, I get called, as well as Noel Chamberlain and all the other stupid names. I'd say I don't care about being called the names. It's water off a duck's back. But what I do care about is the stupidity involved in responding to an argument by name calling and the refusal to listen to any kind of reason. And also the total. A friend of mine recently moved to New York City, to the East 40s, and he sent me a message. He sent me a picture of the view from his flat there, and I said, "Could you nip down to the United Nations and see if there's anybody there?" Because there doesn't seem to be anybody in. Where is the effort in this horrible war in which people are dying, being driven from their homes? Where is the effort to bring it to an end? I see none. Really speaking in favor of peace is classified. Oh, you're appeasing the Russians. You want to reward the Russians for their invasion. Well, I don't. But what I do want to do is stop the war and make sure it doesn't restart, which I think every civilized person, it does say quite clearly in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the peacemakers.
Mm.
It's something which I think we all have to take as an instruction. As I think it says in the Psalms that he breaketh the bow and knappeth the spear in sunder and burneth the chariot in the fire. God is not particularly keen on the wars of men, as I understand it, and those of us who believe in God and in the message of Jesus Christ seem to me to have a duty to actually speak out to bring this thing to an end. But even to do that involves you in being accused of all kinds of falsehoods.
It's always
boring and it's unproductive and stupid, but there it is. You've got to do it.
It's always been that way, though, hasn't it? I in Chichester diocese, reminded of someone who you also stood up in defence of recently, the former bishop, whose name was unfairly cast into all sorts of aspersions. But
shocking! It was another punishment without due process.
But I think part of that probably comes back to his outspoken opposition of the war, of the Second World War, and certainly the way it was prosecuted.
Whether that was why he was, certainly Churchill was extremely hostile to him, and Noel Coward even wrote a nasty song about him, and he was often refused invitations to RAF bases in his diocese and things like that for being against it. But he was very thoughtfully against it. It wasn't passive.
No,
He actually took advice from Little Heart on what he should say when he made his main speech about it. But he was a very serious just war advocate, and also had been far earlier than most people in the church a very strong anti-Nazi in contact with the Christian resistance in Germany. So he knew very much what he was talking about, and he was particularly horrified at the idea of people in Germany who had opposed Hitler being blown to pieces and burnt to death and crushed under buildings indiscriminately in this extraordinary bombing campaign. But it was very difficult for him to say that, and it is probably the most powerful example of Christian witness ever shown in the Church of England. And yet along came this claim against him, and it wasn't properly examined before it was publicised as if it were true. And it's shocking again. In that case, I have to say, I and a number of very dedicated, determined, and clever people did actually manage, I think, to push that back. But still, in Chichester itself, the church authorities in Chichester haven't fully recognised.
You'll be pleased to know he was referenced positively in a recent ad clarem from the current Bishop of Chichester. So things are changing.
Well, can you tell me any more?
I was just trying to look for the reference, but it was he was celebrated.
Tom, for people who don't know who we're talking about,
today on the church calendar about 3 weeks ago, so he should have been mentioned.
Yeah, Tom. Just for people who don't know who we're talking about, do you want to just say who you're talking about?
Yes,
you actually said his name.
George Kennedy Allen Bell, Bishop of Chichester, for a very long period from the 1930s to the late 1950s, who during the 1930s was prominent in trying to rescue refugees from Hitler and in making contact with the German Christian resistance. Particularly active, I have to say, in helping the non-Aryan Christians, Jews who converted to Christianity, and also, as it turned out, in helping with the Kinder transports, and a very dedicated man who gave over his palace to refugees from bombing in this country. And during the war, he came to the conclusion, from a Christian point of view, the indiscriminate bombing of German cities, which we did, was morally wrong and was damaging to our war effort and would damage us in the future when we do it. And made a speech in the House of Lords condemning it. People say, this is just Dresden. It's not just Dresden. The bombing which we inflicted on Germany was inflicted on so many cities. It would take about 3/4 of an hour to read all the names out of the places that we bombed. And we weren't bombing military targets, as sometimes is pretended or claimed at the time. We were deliberately bombing generally working class civilians in their homes, that is to say, those people in Germany who had voted against Hitler right up to the last point when they were still able to do so. A shocking thing, and still, in my view, something this country has failed truly to confront. He confronted it and was excoriated for it. And then completely, long after he died in, I think, 1958, a person made a complaint against him of sexual abuse when she was a child. And that complaint was not initially taken seriously. When it was taken seriously, instead of being considered with a proper judicial and fair process, was concluded to be true, and not only concluded to be true, but widely publicised. So that national papers came out saying George Bell was a paedophile. And that's basically the story. Then a group of people got together and said, this is unjust. I personally, I think that the woman was abused by somebody, but not by him. It wasn't anything to do with our case to in any way denigrate the complainant. People have fair reason to complain about the behaviour of many, I'm afraid, men of the cloth who have behaved very badly. So that's another matter. But I don't think the evidence was remotely enough. And Lord Carlisle, the brilliant QC, came to the same conclusion, that the evidence produced was remotely enough to convict or even to charge in a trial. So that was a case. And eventually, Justin Welby, who initially said, even after the report which had exonerated him, even after that said there was still a significant cloud over him, eventually Justin Welby admitted that was a mistake, for which I praise him, because it was just difficult to admit you've done something wrong, but he did, and I'm very glad to hear it. So that's an unusual instance of a wrong being more or less righted.
Yeah. Can we move on to talk about climate change? We're about a year.
I have very little to say about it. I mean, the climate is evidently changing. The summers and winters of today are quite different from those in my childhood. It would be idiotic to say that they weren't. The question of causation, though, is another more complicated matter, and I'm not really qualified to pronounce on it.
But maybe you can comment on the hysteria that surrounds this issue. Like with COVID, it seems to be another matter where it seems almost impolite to even raise any questions, as you've just done. So why is this?
Dealing with is more or less a new religion. And having been myself a left-wing extremist, just to turn years, I was a revolutionary Marxist in my teens and 20s, early 20s. I find it easy to understand how these fanatical zealotries take a grip upon people's minds. People want to be and to do good. And the climate change gospel as presented to them suggests that there is a tremendously urgent struggle to be carried out, and that those who get in the way of it are actually wicked. And I understand this. I don't find it incomprehensible or even particularly strange, as I have been in this state of moral zealotry myself. What I am at a loss to know how to do is how to tackle it. If you even do, and I took a resolve. There are a lot of things. I confess this to you here because there's no point in having this conversation if you don't know it. There are a lot of things I simply will not discuss anymore, because reason has departed from the subject. And if you say anything about it, it doesn't matter what you say, you will then be classified as some sort of bigot or phobe, and nobody will listen to a word you say. So I just don't do it. This is why I'm not engaging on the question of obviously there has been climate change. I'm not engaging on the key question of what the cause of it is and what we can do about it. But if even on their own terms, this is a fascinating thing. A lot of effort has been devoted to making this country burn less coal. And in fact, what we have done, and this is going to quite possibly be the cause of power shortages this winter, is we have actually actively destroyed major functioning coal-fired power stations. We just close them or mothball them, which I think a rational government would have done. We closed them down and then we blew them up. And not far from where I am sitting, there was Didcot A power station, one of the biggest coal-fired power stations in the country, built in the late 1960s. I remember it being built. And a few years ago, my Sunday morning slumbers were interrupted by an enormous rumble, which I thought couldn't be thunder because of the weather. It wasn't. It was them blowing it up. And they do this all over the place. They blow them up. I think it's a political statement myself that no one says, so while we do this, the People's Republic of China and India as well expand their coal-fired power generation far, far faster than we've reduced ours. So on its own terms, the action is a complete waste of time and effort. We haven't actually reduced the amount of coal burning in the atmosphere. It's all one atmosphere. If you don't burn it in Didcot and you burn it in Inner Mongolia, it doesn't make any difference. If it's having an effect, it will have the same effect burnt in Inner Mongolia as it does in Oxfordshire. So that's on its own. But even if you make this point, the intolerant howling furies come after you. You can't even do that. Yeah. It's not possible. So I don't know. I think we live in a society so poorly educated, and I think that is a huge problem. It's so poorly educated that it no longer has what you might call the clerisy, the group of people experienced, educated, and strong-minded enough to say, no, actually, this generally held prejudice is false, or at the very least unproven, and we shouldn't necessarily be rushed into acting upon it.
Do you think it's fair to say that
educational revolution in the 1960s?
Peter, do you think it's fair to say there's a class divide in this as well? That a lot of the Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil fringe are particularly sort of upper middle class individuals, and that on the other end, people in ordinary jobs who are very alienated and frustrated by this.
Yeah, well, it's true, but it doesn't bother me because I think it's always been the case. I mean, Lenin was not exactly from the working classes, and generally you'll find revolutionaries are from the upper middle class, well-educated, often quite privileged people. And so will most reformers of the kind we probably all approve of be. There's a variety of types. That's where protest comes from. That doesn't in itself make it wrong. And people who work hard manually or in repetitive and soul-destroying jobs in call centers or roaders don't have much time to formulate or take part in process. So it's not surprising to find the middle class being the leaders of it. That doesn't seem to me to be particularly an argument against it. I expect you'd find that some of the better movements in society are from the same source.
Do you see the neo-Marxist obsession with race and identity politics as essentially the same pathology that you've just described, animating the climate change fanaticism? Is it the same? Is it the same thing, or do you see something different at the root of it?
Well, I can't claim to have studied it in any great depth, but it does have this powerful moral root. Those who are involved in it think that they are combating a moral wrong. I mean, they won't be terribly well educated about it or have much of interest to say, but that's what they think they're doing. And that's what drives them. Once you think you're doing good, there's almost nothing you aren't capable of doing. And when in the 1960s, the anti-racialist position of the left was, as I repeatedly say, the best thing about it. Undoubtedly, there was a lot of racial bigotry around, and we, as I would call myself then, we challenged it, and rightly so, and nothing wrong with that. The question is whether this can be taken too far, or can be taken to into areas of policy and government where it doesn't need to go. But it's honestly, the important thing about it is that it has that fundamentally religious characteristic that people believe by engaging in this that they will be doing good.
And
what people do? They don't. You must understand. These people think that they are good and that they're doing good. And if you don't realize that, then you will have very little success in combating them or indeed arguing with them.
Yeah.
And at some point, you have to accept that is what is going on, and also that they won't always be the age they are now. The difficulty is to say that the power of our society to educate with experience is not much greater than its power to educate in schools and universities, because there really isn't much education going on and there isn't much experience about. But I very much feel that people who disagree with me, even if they hate me and would like to strangle me, are my opponents and not my enemies. And I don't think, this is an absolutely Christian position in my view, I don't think that I should respond to their enmity and dismissal by doing the same thing. I think we should all respond to their enmity and dismissal by being as generous towards them as we possibly can, admitting that their motives are good and taking it from there. Whether it'll do any more good, I don't know, but it certainly won't do any less good than is being done by the current efforts of their opponents, who lose at every turn.
Mm. Is it? It must be, given what you've said, it must be a result of the decline of Christianity, though, in our culture, that these sort of quasi-religious impulses attach themselves to secular political ideologies.
Completely, and it is one of the disasters once Christianity ceases to dominate the minds of the culture which is based upon it. Then all kinds of other things rush in to take its place, and many of them, as I say, will be adopted by people who think that what they're doing is saying is good. Mind you, it's easy to find in the history of Christianity people doing terrible things, usually to other Christians, because they think they're good.
But there's an irony there, isn't it? Because if that is indeed what's going on, then we're actually seeing the church itself, to a very great degree, adopting these secularized quasi-religious ideologies.
Yes, but it has been for some time, and there are profound reasons from the intellectual battles of the 19th century, and then passing on to the catastrophe of the First World War, and the church's often quite strong support for it, which has left the church with a very weak foundation for the beliefs it claims to profess. I think the widespread opinion that there's an awful lot of the clergy don't actually believe what it is that they claim to believe is not accidental. I think a lot of clergy people do have trouble believing what it is they profess to believe.
And since we're talking about the church, Peter, if you could give some advice to the bishops of the Church of England and the leaders within it, what would you say?
Well, I can't, because I know they wouldn't take it. I mean, the contrast that is always to be seen in the Church of England, particularly, which I know a bit about, other churches may have similar contrast, between the poor parish priest living, as many do, in circumstances of some privation and in quite rough areas, in many cases, the only, as it were, representative of anything remotely resembling authority in the, as it were, the badlands of our cities, compared with the bloviating politicians of the hierarchy. It's hard sometimes to believe they're in the same church.
Mind you, that's not a new thing, is it? If you've read any Trollope, it's which of course is satirical, but it was a problem throughout the Church of England, wasn't it?
Churches are human institutions. Sometimes things go too far. Sometimes they become a bit too human. I think the Church of England is a bit too human at the moment, but that doesn't remove or destroy the fact that there are many people in it who do a great deal of good. But how those people become the controllers of it, I don't know. And many of them too, I think, are probably more politically than religiously motivated.
Daniel, do you want to bring up your particular question that you want to ask Peter?
I was struck listening to some of Russell Brand's recent material, and I wondered if is he now a kind of fellow traveller? Observing, I don't know if you observed much of his recent stuff.
No,
but I'm minded of the real fiery discussions that you and he had 10 years ago on drugs, criminalisation of drugs, but he seems to have been a different tact now. And I just wondered if you
have to tell me how. I don't pay much attention to him.
Well, I suppose I'd say that there would be people who would listen to his output who would be sympathetic to us, but would probably also be sympathetic to you and to Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray, a sort of anti-globalist kind of landscape, if I may.
Alas, I wouldn't put myself in the same grouping as Jordan Peterson or Douglas Murray. We don't really form a unity. I simply don't know what Russell Brand does in the long intervals between our brief and turbulent meetings. So I have no idea what he's been saying. You give me an example, I can comment on it, but otherwise I just don't know. Have you got anything?
Well, I think he seems to particularly more recently, but very, very sort of struck about, he's certainly and seems to be anti-lockdown.
What did you say during the event?
Yeah, I mean, I would say more recent. Yeah, that recently he's come out as, it was all an error and what
Well,
have you.
sure. And as I say, everybody in the country now thinks it was an error.
It might be as well that Russell Brand is taking that tack because he's more of a sort of libertarian mindset, which would tally with his view on drugs, wouldn't it?
You got me there because I don't think libertarian is a word that means anything.
Right.
And yeah. I have to refer to my old friend Karl Marx, who pointed out that nobody fights against liberty. They fight only against the liberty of others. And that you can't make... It's one of those attempts, like the free market, the Adam Smith worship, which doesn't work because Smith himself is a moral. One of these attempts by pseudo-conservatives to manufacture morality which has no Christian basis.
Yeah.
But you can't make liberty a principle. Liberty conflict. So
yeah, that's really.
I don't think that can work.
Yeah. So why is it, do you think, Peter, that there is so little moral pushback on the use of recreational drugs? I mean, you've been a lone voice in this area, haven't you? What do you see is going on there?
My generation saw particularly marijuana as a sort of sacrament of their new beliefs. The shared joint and all the rest of it is a kind of sacramental moment. And also they all did it and they let their children do it and they think that it was harmless. If I say this, which seems to me to be blazingly obvious about modern society, the enormous propaganda power of popular music and lately of rock music to spread ideas or to destroy ideas it's colossal. It makes the normal advertising industry of television look puny to me. And one of the things which the popular and rock music industry has done has been to popularize the use of drugs in lyrics and in the behavior of the major figures in rock. It's the constant, relentless promotion of drugs against which the individual struggles very hard. How can you do it? The evil things can be made glamorous, and indeed often they're the easiest things to make glamorous. And I think that's really one of the reasons why, one of the main reasons why it's a popular cause. People don't think about it. People don't think about it much. Also, I have to add that there is now, with the prospect of marijuana legalization quite close and actually a reality in some Western countries, there's very, very strong commercial lobbies for legalization. There's a lot of money to be made out of human misery, there always is. And also quite a lot of irresponsible politicians can see an opportunity for a new syntax. They've lost a lot of income from the decline in tobacco smoking, and they need something new. And here's another one. So it's extraordinary that, having spent 50 years clubbing the tobacco industry in submission, finally getting people to recognize that smoking cigarettes is a stupid thing to do, and to stop advertising of that, we're now opening another front in which something perhaps even more dangerous is going to be encouraged by advertising on an open sale. But there it is. But there's a lot of money in this. So and when you go on the internet and people start abusing you for saying what I say, I think, well, how many of these people who appear to be individuals are actually individuals? And how many of them have another occupation, aren't who they say they are, and are working for some commercial lobby? I don't know. It wouldn't surprise if I were such a commercial lobby. It's one of those things that I do. And it gives the appearance of there being a very strong preponderance of people in favor of drug abuse. An organization like the BBC is of course, totally surrendered on this matter. Again, because so many of, I have to stress, nobody in the BBC takes drugs.
And I find it ironic that the churches, and particularly our own denomination, has been very silent on this, in which you'd have thought this was a natural area to park our tanks in so many ways.
But then again, it's not. Once the person in holy orders has decided to embrace the social gospel, then serious self-control and individual responsibility cease to be part of his or her program, so it doesn't. It's not the same thing. And what is now being worshipped and said in our churches is not really, in my view, in many cases, Christianity at all. So what you say ought to be true, but it's not particularly surprising it isn't. The people who join the clergy in many cases come from exactly the same places as the people who are now in responsible positions in the police, who are very pro-drug, in the media and in politics and in the civil service and in teaching, again, who are very pro-drug. It's extraordinary. Wherever you go, you find it. I used to be shocked. I was going to do a debate at a big school in North London, and finding one of the teachers actually arguing against me and getting applauded by his pupils for being in favor of drug legalization. I thought, we really do have the trahison d'éclair here. The people are actually betraying their own deep responsibility. How anybody who teaches and wants to spread knowledge could possibly think that it would be wise to make it legal to buy and sell mind-altering drugs, I do not know. But there he was doing it and getting applauded for it, whereas I was getting a pretty cold shoulder. So,
is that because the perception that's been allowed to grow is that a conservative and moral one, particularly on this issue, is one that's cold and incompassionate?
I suppose so. And that's always been what people have said, isn't it? Anybody who actually suggests that self-restraint is wise, and that holding back from pleasure can sometimes be necessary, is automatically assumed to be some sort of, if not a Scrooge, then certainly some sort of joyless killer of pleasure, and there you are, you're gone. But again, this is only possible in an uneducated society where nobody knows anything. But we live in one of those, so it's possible that it happens.
Peter, switching tack slightly, your late brother Christopher was very influential in the so-called New Atheist movement. What do you make of the legacy of that movement now? Do you think that that's a failed project, or how do you see it?
It had its moment. What had happened was, and I think there'll be a long legacy in the United States, was that a very large number of young people of college age in the United States found themselves going to college and wanting to live lives of hedonism and self-indulgence and bodily autonomy. And all the messages they'd had all their lives from everybody in authority they'd known, teachers, pastors, parents, had all been, don't do this. And along came my brother, who very articulately and quite amusingly and eloquently made the opposite case and preached what was basically the gospel of self. And he was amazingly popular because of that. There is a very interesting thing about a lot of followers of my late brother, many of whom barely knew him and didn't read much of what he wrote, but they liked his public performances. They quite often attack me on social media. And what I notice about them is that they don't care about the fact that he made a very grave mistake of supporting the Iraq War. One which they would normally, the kind of people who would normally disapprove of such a war, and I point out, they don't really care, because they care far more about bodily autonomy. This was the real issue. That's what the real issue of the new atheism, and indeed the old atheism, was about. What atheism frees you to do is to do what thou wilt. And that's what he offered them. So he, by being plainly at least as well educated, if not better, as eloquent, and this doughty in debates he was, he gave a lot of people license to behave as they wanted to do. And that's what it was about, continues to be about, and why he's still revered by them.
Am I right in thinking, though, that Christopher was actually quite skeptical about the moral veracity of the practice of abortion?
He was, and it's an interesting, I think he had enough sense to know, having thought about it profoundly, that the argument that life begins at conception is actually a very hard one to counter. And it's that he wasn't the only person on the American left who took this view, but it was quite rare. And but again, when you put it to people who are admirers of his, they either don't believe it or they just put it very quickly to one side. They cope with it.
Yeah, it does seem to be somewhat of an anomaly in terms of the.
It appears to be an anomaly, but the thing that really appealed to, I think, people about him was his transparent intelligence and wit and his grasp of major issues, moral and political. And so this was one such issue on which he took a position which they didn't like. So it doesn't, as he did on the Iraq War, but it doesn't matter to them because that was never what they were interested in. He wasn't, for them, he had another purpose. And so who cares if he was in favor of the bloodiest war in modern history and the stupidest? And also, who cares if he's against abortion? Well, I mean, it's just another thing, is it doesn't matter to the fundamental argument.
What we've found in our podcasting in the last couple of years is, in terms of our fan mail, heartfelt, genuine communications to us and letters have been overwhelmingly from people coming out of the new atheist movement. I think looking, maybe ennobled by the ideas of searching for the truth, not wanting a woke existence or a nihilistic one, and certainly not that interested in another religion. And I think we found that quite surprising, and hopeful that.
Well, maybe. I mean, I'm a former atheist. People sometimes stop being atheists. They just do, but a lot of them carry on because it continues to suit them. I wouldn't get too excited. Mass desertion, because atheism is a chosen. I mean, in my view, all beliefs are chosen, but atheism is a chosen belief, chosen by people who want to do as they wish.
Yep.
And a lot of people want to do that.
Yeah, indeed. For the last little bit of time, can we just talk a little bit about the present and the future? What do you make of the recent market coup, which has ended with a new prime minister who nobody in the Conservative Party seemed to want, Peter?
Which one is that? I mean,
you may have lost track. It's Rishi Sunak.
Oh, him. Well, I mean, they seem to want him. I don't know. The Conservative Party is an organisation for obtaining power. That's its only purpose. It has no beliefs, no ideas. Therefore, it has become more or less the supporter of the ideas of the left, because it's easier to obtain office that way. And so the problem is, in moments when it needs to try to differentiate itself from its chief competitor, as when perhaps Ryanair has to differentiate itself from EasyJet in some way, it has to think of a gimmick. And I think Miss Truss was that gimmick. As I've said elsewhere, I think she bought her opinions such as they were on eBay. She didn't believe anything particularly strongly. And what the thing she chose to believe was so daft that it blew up in her face. I mean, the idea that the British economy can be stimulated by flinging wide the doors of the market and low taxation is like the idea that you can give a pensioner a handful of amphetamines and an electric shock and a can of Red Bull, and he can then join the Olympic team. It's not possible. The British economy is in such a tragic state that nothing of that kind, no shock treatment, will do anything other than make it worse. It was daft government, so it deserved to fall.
So you say, or at least I'm sure I've heard you say, that you believe the Conservative Party must die in order for something better to come along.
I believe the Conservative. It's been nearly 20 years I've been saying this. When I first said it, I genuinely thought that, particularly before 2010, if David Cameron's Blairisation of the Conservative Party could be rejected and that it would then fail, and people stopped giving money to it, and people realised throughout the country, that Conservative people realised they had no friend at Westminster, there was no party that represented them there, then they might get off their backsides and create a new political formation which actually did represent Conservative thinking and morals and desires. I don't think that will happen now. I think what will happen now is the Conservative Party will collapse. It will do so badly in the next election, and that'll be the end of that.
So what could...
We'll then have constitutional change so that we'll get a proportional representation, so there will never be a majority Conservative government again anyway.
So commentators like Toby Young have said, well, what we need to do is we need to reform the Conservative Party. And
his story. I'm not. So he would say that, wouldn't he? But it's a dead organisation. It's been a corpse for many years. Both the major political parties are corpses. They don't stand for anything. They're relics of an era when nationalisation was an important political issue.
But in terms of, people asking the question, what can I as a voter do? Should I vote Conservative and hope that we can have some kind of actual genuine renaissance in the party, or should I just spoil my ballot and just ballot and just?
I don't care what you do. I have no political engagement whatsoever and haven't had for several years.
Right.
I regard politics as a form of idolatry. If you want to engage in it, it's your problem. There is nothing to be gained from it. It's delusion mixed up with, I think, one of the 19th century popes called satanic optimism. Politics isn't going to fix it. It's gone. There was, as I say, I think there was an opportunity 20 or up to about 12 years ago to do something, but the opportunity was thrown away. I got, again, here we are back 2010. And in several years before, I argued with Conservatives over and over again, colleagues, friends, people I went to speak to. I said, we've got to get rid of this party. It's a disaster. It stands for nothing. It blocks the way to the formation of a proper conservative organisation in the country. And I got not exactly howled down, but treated as if I was evil, stupid, and mad. Now I'm surrounded by people saying, do you know what? Peter is absolutely right. The Conservative Party is totally useless. And I say, well, thanks a lot. But do you know what? It's no good saying that now. It's the point when you have to act, is the point where it's not evident to everybody and where somebody tells you to think. And if, when asked to think, you refuse to do so, and then you come back, there's the old story, isn't there, about the Scottish Presbyterian minister whose congregation he preaches to week in, week out about the dangers of hellfire. And then they all die. And they're all in hell, and they look up and see the minister walking around about, looking down from heaven, and they say, "But minister, we didn't can." He says, "But you can now." That's why anybody who's been fool enough to vote for or support or say a good word for the Conservative Party for 12 years, my answer is, "Well, you can now, you stupid fool." That's you. I told you, and I told you, and actually, many people were very rude to me for telling them.
Yeah,
something had to be done. I tried to recruit other newspaper columnists. I said, if only somebody would join me in this, we would get so. Oh no, that's not my job.
Yeah.
So I'm not totally unsympathetic. If anyone wants to fool around with the Conservative Party now, that's their worry. It's over. There are no politics in this country.
So Peter, many people who listen to this podcast are concerned about central bank digital currencies, globalist organizations like the World Economic Forum and the WHO and so on and so forth. What's your opinion on all that kind of thing? Are you concerned?
I don't take it seriously.
Okay.
I noticed the other day, by the way, that I share a birthday with Bill Gates.
Okay.
So probably I'm one of his guys. That must be the reason why I'm so.
Okay.
I'm probably a lizard as well. Oh, give me a break. Honestly, this is not serious politics. It's not how the world is run. Okay. And these are side issues. The issue is here we have a society which actually possessed freedom under the law and also a reasonably solid and well-run economy. We throw them all away. And those, such as my good self, who said, look, you're throwing all this away, stop doing it, were held down. So don't expect me to be sympathetic to your problems now, but don't blame it all on Bill Gates or lizards. It's not. The person to look at if you're looking for the culprits for what's wrong with our society is yourself. People who did nothing when they could have done something, who didn't listen when I asked. I'm totally merciless about this. And people sometimes write to me and say, oh, there's so terrible things happening in my children's school. And I write back and say, well, how did you vote? 2010, 2015, they say, Conservatives, well, this is what you voted for. Sorry, this is what it's like.
Yeah,
this is how it is.
I think that's partly because
you wouldn't pay any attention. I did the scrutiny lectures in Oxford, and I said, the problem with revolutionary Marxists is they're not very nice, because I'm not very nice, but actually they understand politics better than anybody else. They make the best conservatives, in fact, increasingly the only conservatives. And I said, I like Cromwell's plain russet-coated captain, except I know what I fight against, and I hate what I know. And if I try to explain to people how actual revolutionary politics works in this country, and who's done what and how it's been achieved, they look at me as though I was off my trolley. So there you are. But the truth is that the Marxist training is essential to understanding what's happened. You can't begin to grasp the nature, particularly of New Labour, if you don't know what Eurocommunism is and what it's about, or you've never heard of Antonio Gramsci. And people haven't, and they won't listen. And the most amazing political revelation of the past 5 years was when Blair gave an interview to Peter Hitchens, in which he admitted something which had been kept the most closely guarded secret in the country for years while he was in serious policy. He admitted he'd been a Trotskyist at the university. Mm. And do you know what? Mine was the only newspaper which even bothered to cover this astonishing story. Imagine if that had come out in 1996. Yeah. Imagine. But it didn't. But if it comes out afterwards, does that mean we should just ignore it? Oh, that doesn't matter. Oh, it was just a youthful indiscretion. No, it wasn't. Half his cabinet were in the same position. And unlike me, and I can go on till the cows come home about becoming a Trotskyist, I'll tell you everything about it you ask me and more. And they don't talk about it because it's still important to them. They're still revolutionaries. But people who say, oh, no, conspiracy theory, bread's under the bed. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Have it your way. I don't care. It's all over now anyway. Yeah. Bit of luck, I'll be dead before the real problems start.
But Peter, nevertheless, you do continue to write, and you do continue to engage.
Because it's fun to write, and I don't. I was only making myself miserable trying to engage in politics and achieve things. All that happened was the frustration of realizing that there was no transmission belt between what I think and say and what would happen. Now, what I say, I can say it over and over and over again. I mean, there's almost no major political problem about which I haven't written, actually, in my view, in some cases, books. In many cases, articles of penetrating power. I can even tell you the origin of the Health and Safety Society everybody hates and the legislation which brought it about, which can be repealed in a night if anybody would pay any attention. But nobody, I write it every so often and nothing ever happens. Nobody comes to you and say, hey, that's interesting. We ought to do something about nothing. There is no transmission belt between what I say and what will happen.
Right.
So I write it because I enjoy writing and I like communicating with people and I arguing, but I've long ago ceased to have any belief that it will make any difference.
Okay, so you're writing. Writing doesn't make any difference. Politics is dead. You've said before that when people ask you what to do, British people, when they ask you what to do about the country, you say to leave.
Under a certain age, to many people, it's too late for them to leave. For me, it's too late to leave.
How old?
Well, when you're still capable of learning a new language in the place you've gone to and contributing seriously to that society, you can't go as a sponger. You would have to go as an active migrant of the kind that country will welcome. And what you're not going to better yourself, you're going to flee from the wrath to come.
Okay. What is
progress? It's going to be very bad here.
What's going to happen?
What
will happen?
I don't know, but I've been saying for some time. I said for some years, look at the economy. All this spending, it's going to lead to very, very serious inflation. I said.
No.
No, inflation. The very idea, inflation has been conquered, and now look. And I said, our biggest port in Felixstowe, and far more stuff comes in than comes out, and much of the stuff that comes out is actually just garbage to be recycled.
Or burnt elsewhere.
It has to be. And these things count. And I've said that our education system is the most disgracefully bad in the advanced world. And it is. And you see it all the time in the moronic things which people do and say. Nothing. It doesn't matter what you say. Nothing. Nobody pays any attention. And so what shape or form it will take, I can't tell you. As Adam Smith said, there's a lot of ruin in a nation. We've proved that in the past 30 or 40 years in this country. There is a lot of ruin in a nation, but you do eventually run out.
Do you know, Pete, I'm getting quite echoes of Ecclesiastes here. I wonder whether it's your favorite book, but so I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold the tears of such as were oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there were power, but they had no comforter. I don't know. It feels like that resonates with the future.
True, isn't it? It's what those passages say is societies which will not listen to the message of God eventually destroy themselves.
Yeah,
is this where I think a lot of cultural warriors have got it wrong, in that we need to be working much more upstream? This is a spiritual problem in the end, and that if that isn't fixed, then nothing can be fixed.
I would say. I don't know. I didn't. Again, when I ended the Scruton lecture in Oxford a week ago, I ended it by saying the second collective morning prayer, because I thought that the most essential thing that I could say is I'd spoken in favour of internal exile and of there being no political purpose left. I mean, I say this. One of the reasons I say this is this: if somebody can prove me wrong, I'll be pleased. I won't say, "Oh, good heavens, you proved me wrong. You found a way to rescue our society from the pit into which it's diving." I will be pleased if they do it, and it's a very powerful reason for saying what I say. I cannot see it. I've tried myself to find such insight.
Have you read?
Ultimately, it's the only hope lies, as it's always lain, in eternity, not in temporal things.
Have you read any of Rod Dreher's sort of solutions? The Benedict option?
I can't say I've read the whole thing. No, I'm aware of it. I think there's some sense in it, but I don't know what form.
Yeah,
he's actually we know him as a friend of the podcast, and from time to time, I think in despair, he said, perhaps living the Benedict option is not something you do in your home now, but maybe we all have to go and live off grid. And he's seriously worried that when he published the book that people wouldn't think this, but now he's beginning to think it himself, looking at the state of things.
Yes, well, it doesn't. It's looking at the United States is not a very encouraging thing at the moment either, is it? I don't know. It's very hard to tell. You can predict things in general, and you'll usually be right. It's not very hard to see the future in general. What's hard to do is to see it in particular, and also to see the speed at which events can happen. They might take. We might, in 18 months, not be able to have this conversation because there's no electricity. I don't know.
Yeah. Part of me is starting to think that we need to form communities that rediscover some of those old, it's the old crafts that have left society that's going to cause it to crumble in the end. When no one can make a horseshoe or drive a plough.
You also need to learn how to fix a power station when it goes up.
Wow.
That Stephen King novel, isn't it, The Stand, where they have to spend months and months and months rewinding all the cables to get the power station to work by hand. It's the only way they're going to get electricity ever again. How many of us knows how to generate a single watt?
Yeah. Peter, we've taken more of your time than we said, so we'll leave it there for this time. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. I think that it's very congruent with what we think, and I think especially when you say the hope lies ultimately in eternity, I think that's something we can all say amen to. So thank you, Peter, for giving us some of your time this evening.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.
Okay, chaps. So we thought, firstly, what we do is just do a sort of short reflection on the conversation with Peter. I mean, who wants to go first? How do you feel?
Well, it's not the sort of most positive end, does it? It sort of went from the sort of from mundane to the very dark by the end. But in Peter's normal way. I guess it shouldn't have been unexpected. I like to think there's slightly more hope for society, because I like to think that that in the end all will be made well in and through Christ,
in an eschatological sense. But I do sympathise with his suggestion that. That we're going to come through some very tricky times indeed in the next few years. It's hard to deny the logic behind what he's saying. He wouldn't commit himself though. When I said what's going to happen, he said, "Well, I don't know, just something terrible."
Yeah, that's true. I mean, his point was, a fair one, that it's much easier to predict wider trends than it is to predict specific things, though, isn't it? I mean, you got a sense of what he thought was going to happen. You thought, some sort of Labour government coming in sooner or later, then changing the voting system to AV, and maybe sort of entrenching a sort of liberal left leadership. In the meantime, the sort of economy's not really sorted out, because no one can really sort out an economy that's so moribund and reliant on borrowing. That in some sense, that those two things together lead to both societal, moral and economic collapse, which well, I guess is what he's thinking.
So his answer to that question really is societal, economic, and moral collapse.
Well, I told you so, I think, is his answer, isn't it?
Total collapse. Yeah. I found it quite amusing when I asked him, do you feel you've been vindicated about COVID? And he said, well, of course I have, because I was right. So it was a good answer. One of the
folks listening in, I mean, where a criticism we had with Lord Frost is people said, oh, why didn't you push him on this and that more? We're not journalists. We know we're vicars. And we have a podcast which is, commenting on current affairs and the state of things, where we're digging deeper, we're sense making and that. So, at some points I thought, we could really push him on this, but
he's such an experienced debater, isn't he? But it's quite hard to push him on anything he doesn't really want to push on. I mean, he's
a debater, and I suppose it's easy to be starstruck. I mean, I've found myself barely sleeping last night over this, just my head spinning. Particularly when he said, I think my advice would be to anyone of age, leave the country.
Yeah.
And his answer ticks all my boxes.
I didn't ask him, and what he should have been asked is where.
Yeah, where? Yeah, where? That's what I think. I woke up at 4 a.m. thinking, well, where? And you start going through all the countries, and then if you think of of globalism as the political alternative that we and many others are trying to contest, well, globalism by its nature is global. So where would you go? And it's very difficult, Falkland Islands, Arctic Circle.
But he was very dismissive of concerns about globalism, wasn't he? Which was another thing that I found interesting, because I'd never really heard him comment on that. But when I asked him, I mean, he just completely dismissed it. He said, "Oh, this is a fantasy. Like, what we know what the problem is, and it's the failure of the Conservative Party and New Labour and all that kind of stuff." So sorry, Tom.
But I mean, it depends what you mean. I mean, we'd sort of sometimes a bit maybe hasty to bandy around a word without properly defining what it is, and maybe that's why he reacted in that way. Because I mean, in one sense, sort of, you don't have to think of for it to be a conspiracy theory so much. I know we have issues with that term as a sort of as a whole, but let's just hold it for the moment. What is a globalist? What are they actually acting together? Well, yes and no. They're not necessarily organized, but they certainly have aspirations in similar.
This is one of the issues where we didn't push him, because he was just so forceful. It was impossible. Yeah. It's almost like it was really quite hard to sort of think, isn't it? It's like you're sort of swept away by his rhetoric. Yeah. But now, in the sort of cold light of day, I suppose what I would say about it is that I suppose the question I would ask is, well, how can you sort of dismiss concerns about supranational organizations like the WHO and the WEF when Peter is such a vehement critic of the EU and its version of globalism? It might be different in many ways to those organizations, but it still nevertheless represents the same sort of political sensibility.
But that's it, isn't it? It's a collection of sensibility, isn't it? It's a collection of people who happen to who've grown into power in a sort of corporate environment where they're seeking profits that know no national boundaries, in a sense, and that's where it's that's what it is. And I don't think they have to necessarily be evil to be a bad, or overtly evil, to be a sort of a negative future. No one wants, and I think there are people who are working towards that future, aren't there? I don't know whether that means they're. I think they're
not. I think that they, like Peter said, they think they're doing good, don't they? They think that they're saving the world, and that's kind of how you explain. Well, that's precisely how you explain their zeal for their cause. A lot of the time, outstripping people who actually subscribe to a real religion in zealousness.
I think that's why when I pushed him about Russell Brand, I mean, I realised then that, as you said earlier on, Tom, we're dealing with a seasoned debater, and he wasn't going to play ball with some obscure vicar from Devon on this at all, but that Brand potentially has moved and shares some of his concerns, is more in his camp than anywhere else. But
yeah. Go on, carry on.
I don't think he was dismissive. I mean, if taking it at face value, he just simply hadn't bothered seeing where he is. I mean, I'm skeptical of Brand's renaissance again because I suspect that he's not coming from a conservative position, but from a position of that looks conservative only as much as it's concerned for absolute freedom.
Well, it's not conservative at all, Tom. It's libertarian, which is what concern for absolute freedom is, and that's what I said. That's what I said to Peter. I said that's exactly the point I was trying to make, which is that Brand is critical of the COVID stuff because he has that kind of libertarian sensibility, whereas Peter's got a much more of a traditional sort of conservative sensibility, and his concern is about the destruction of the institutions and so on as a result of this madness. So the point being there that it's possible to be against the COVID response for political reasons which are actually in many ways diametrically opposed to each other, by which I mean libertarianism and conservatism. But again, he dismissed that. Gosh, it's raining really heavily here. I'm sorry if you can hear that. But he dismissed that out of hand. He said, "Oh, libertarianism just doesn't mean anything." And I was surprised at that because it clearly does mean something. It's a major strand of political thought with intellectual pedigree and so on.
And I think we could contrast him to Russell Brand with the end of his conversation about faith, God, the Bible, and spirituality, whereas Russell Brand is much more woolly on that area, though seemingly sympathetic and presents himself, as some detractors have said, somewhat kind of Christ-like in front of the microphone.
Yeah, sat cross-legged with his kind of
cross-legged with in sandals and what have you. But Peter Hitchens is much more rooted in the sort of traditional religion Anglican response to things.
Yeah. Well, yes, that is true. But at the same time, well, I think for me the major thing, and I'm sure this is the case for you two as well. Surely the major sort of thing about his outlook, it's his pessimism and the bleakness of it. So it was almost like, if you were to do a sort of theological analysis, it was almost like a sort of, one of those dispensationalist views of things where, well, it's all for the burning. We should just basically abandon everything and hope for, well, I don't know what.
Which one of the things I woke up in the morning thinking about, well, that's all fair and dandy, but how do we as clergy either go and live off grid or we support people in times of trouble? Yeah. And I think we're largely called to be in the midst of chaos. If things are bad, we're not, as pastors, our heart would be to stay with our flock.
Yeah. I would be interested because we mentioned Rod Dreher's magnum opus, the Benedict option, and it was clear that he was familiar vaguely with it, but not particularly specifically. And I'd be interested to know what Peter thought of it actually as an alternative to his, well, just leave the country, which is essentially, rather than doing that, building strong communities that can withstand the coming shock. And in a sense, they're both they both come from the same place. Their analysis of the problem boils down to a spiritual one, which was where we did find agreement with Peter at the end. And I think it was got quite, the most theological of our discussion. Fundamentally, what ails this world is not poor economics. It's not poor political parties. It's not even a conservative party that doesn't mean anything. It is that people have lost, or at least the West has lost its basis in Christianity, and so they if in a sense they see a same problem, but Rod's response is positive, whereas Peter's is rather negative, and I think that is.
And when you say the difference between Brand and Peter Hitchens is that Russell Brand sees that there is a spiritual problem, but the solution is in the abstract, where Peter would say it was definitively like us in the particular in Christianity and our loss of Christianity. There's been lots of people who've said, oh, Russell Brand should, is he or should he convert to Christianity? Is he on the verge? I'm not sure he is. But Peter Hitchens is definitely practicing Anglican.
Yeah, he's a practicing Anglican, but of a particular sort of style, isn't he? I'd call it a kind of Jeremiah style. Or did one of you say something off?
Ecclesiastes.
Ecclesiastes. Yeah, you said Ecclesiastes, but somebody else compared him to another. Was it just a sort of generic Old Testament prophet of?
Yeah, that was
pre-exile
prophet. Yes,
pre-exile prophet. Yeah, I think
we're going over the edge, chaps. That's
I think
it's too late.
Yeah,
there's that moment in. Which prophet is it? Where he's, God says, take up your belongings, pack them in a bag, and dig a tunnel through the wall, and then walk out saying, "This is how you will all leave." When the king comes, when the king of Babylon comes to pillage.
But I think what's good about what is fresh about Peter Hitchens is in the same similar way. What's fresh about Jordan Peterson is that the invitation is for us to point the finger towards ourselves rather than just to simply blame others for everything. To languish in victimhood. He will rightly say, I think, that the reason why we're in this state economically is because each one of us cumulatively has decided to, abandon the faith of old and drink in the wells of debt. That there's a personal responsibility that is so often put to the margins, and it's always someone else's fault.
I mean, I agree with the point in general, Daniel. I'm just not sure Peter would apply it to himself. I think he would say it was everyone else who made the mistake.
Oh, yes.
I was warning them not to.
I was warning them not to.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, my sort of reflection upon it is that he may well be right that the nation is heading for disaster. For all sorts of reasons, you can see why it's a reasonable thing to consider. But I think on our podcast, we want to, and well, I'm sure just in general, in our lives and ministries, we want to convey a message of Christian hope, which has to be rooted in Christ and in his purposes, regardless of what's going on around us. And I resonate strongly with what you said, Daniel, about staying and remaining with your people. And I don't think that's just for us as ministers. I think that's the right impulse in general. God has put us in a certain place, in a nation, with a family, or with friends, or with certain responsibilities, and that's where he wants us to exercise our Christian calling, regardless of what's going on around us. And then the other aspect to it as well is this may be, and this is another theme we've explored on the podcast quite a lot before, it may be now that the Lord is shaking us out of our complacency, that we're becoming poorer, we have less reliance on material things, anxiety creeps up in our hearts as our idols are shattered, and God is calling us to look to him. And that's really my hope. Obviously, I hope that our nation doesn't fall to its knees and become crippled by recession and blackouts and so on. But ultimately, if those things do happen, we have to have a spiritual interpretation of them. So that's my sense of that is not really in any way altered by anything Peter said, really. It exacerbates that sense in me, if anything, listening to him talk like that. Speaking of which, should we do our scripture reading for the day? Because it kind of
very opposite this, isn't it?
Very opposite. So for people who perhaps don't listen to the podcast or haven't listened to the podcast, for those who are not yet podcast listeners, but just trying us out, we do normally do a scriptural reflection more towards the beginning of the podcast to get us off on the right foot, but we're delaying it till later just because we had the Peter interview. But this week we're going through, or this season, very nice Christian word there. We're going through the Sermon on the Mount, and as it happens, or you might say, within the providence of God, we are at chapter 6 and verse 25. And I have to say, very genuinely, this is a passage that's been very dear to me in my Christian life, and I think in many ways is my favorite passage in all the scripture. I don't want to big it up too much, but I just love this passage.
My wife and I had it at our wedding.
Did you really?
Yeah.
It's a lovely passage to have at your wedding. I'd never even sort of considered it as a wedding passage, but I can see now that you've said that.
Was it a brig and share lunch afterwards, Tom?
Yeah, I think it was. So weddings and getting married, and those of you who've done it or involved in any way, the stresses and the toil and the worries that came. So it seemed to be sort of culminating in a reminder that actually this is for God and not just for you or just for your families. Is really important.
Yeah. So it's Matthew chapter 6 and from verse 25. And as I read this, it's a good thing to reflect upon how it applies to what we've just been speaking about. So these are the words of Christ. Therefore, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. There we are.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And I guess, the sort of basic principle, which really speaks to the very heart of everything we discuss on this show, is the sort of the interface between the material and the spiritual. And we live in a culture which is so fixated with just the material world around us and pays very little heed to the spiritual world. And what Christ is really saying in this passage fundamentally is, God will provide your needs materially. Focus upon the most important aspect of life, which is the spiritual, which is our pursuit of God and our knowledge of Jesus Christ. Now, it's not to say that, the material world is unimportant, or that we shouldn't provide for ourselves, or that we shouldn't care for others who are in need and things like that. But it's about recognizing the source of all of our material provision, which is from God. And I think that's the problem, isn't it? Is that in our culture, we don't acknowledge God, publicly, in our political life, in our schools, and in other public institutions. We act as though God doesn't exist and that we're just completely independent. And nevertheless, this is a call to acknowledge the source of our provision and our life in a very, very beautiful way. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you. So it's about getting our spiritual priorities right.
And there's been a heretical movement within the church recently of the prosperity gospel, which seems to inverse this in a rather sort of hideous way. that God will lavish you with every material good because you turn up to this or that church, or put in money to this or that preacher's collection. And there's actually psychological versions of this that are very subtle as well. I've found even within our own denomination, which is that nothing bad will happen to you, or the script is now set, for a happy up life, and your mind is going to be filled now that you've come to faith, and as long as you keep with church X, Y, or Z, then that sort of up and up feel good feeling is going to continue. And of course, there's some of our friends to this podcast, including Rod Dreher, as we mentioned earlier on, has said that we need to now as churches reclaim that old idea of being a Christian as having a dimension of suffering for our faith, and that we carry and bear our cross as part of the and a simple life as part of the glory of being a Christian. That's what we do joyfully, and that's tough. It's not an easy sell to put that on a billboard.
Yeah, but it gives you a place to take the anxiety that produces, doesn't it? So you're anxious about what might happen to you. Well, then you need to bring that anxiety before the throne of God and find your peace in God. And so even though we do have to take up our cross and follow after Christ, we nevertheless have the presence of God to help us and to guide us within that difficulty. I mean,
a book that came out, about 15 years ago, called Affluenza. It was Oliver James, journalist commentator. He published it just before the financial crash, and one of the things that he found, and he looked at this with considerable metrics, was that the rich on the whole are very stressed by their material possessions.
Yeah.
And that if you went beyond the above average income in your household, the likelihood is that your misery increased. It was almost like one of these bell
curve,
bell curves. And I see this a bit locally here, that we have 60% of our housing stock around here is second homes that are barely ever occupied. We have millionaire mansions and people who are too time poor to use them.
Yeah.
So, this passage of the Sermon on the Mount's timeless, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do. For anyone who didn't get the reference or who's unfamiliar with Scripture, just to repeat, it's in Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 to 34, and I do think it's one of those passages which can really bring peace to an anxious soul. So do use the Scripture for that reason and meditate on the words of Christ. Apart from anything else, I think there's just pastoral wisdom here, about which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to his span of life. I mean, it's true, isn't it? Anxiety just doesn't produce anything. It doesn't do anything. It feels like it's somehow going to help to worry about things, but actually it's just horrible, and it makes you miserable, and you might as well try and find another way than feeling anxious. So I love that aspect of the passage as well. Chap, should we I
was just going to add to that, there's a certain kind of therapy, I think particularly common to these sort of American analysts who have tended to overplay this kind of Freudian sense of look how hard, how many hard knocks life has given me in terms of a lack of this or that, and I think Christianity, particularly as C.S. Lewis shows in books like the Screwtape Letters and The Great Divorce, actually has a very deep and profound psychology.
Yeah, I think that's true. Very true. Okay, well, let's move on to the new Irreverend Awards. Now we've gone quite quite long already, so we're going to have to go through these now, chaps. I haven't given you loads of time to think about this, so it's just going to have to be, you know, like
quick fire.
What comes into your mind. So here we go. So the new Irreverend Award. So basically, the idea is there's a biblical character, and then you've got to award this award to, you know, a person in contemporary life. It can be over the span of the podcast, but since we did one of these about a year ago, I think we should think about it like over the sort of recent past. So like last 6 months or so. So here we go. Firstly, the Isaiah Award for wild-eyed prediction of doom.
Should be Jeremiah, really, shouldn't it?
That could be
Isaiah.
Yeah.
Isaiah's like one of the more positive prophets, isn't he?
Yeah, I don't know why. I think I probably meant to write Jeremiah. So I'm changing that to the Jeremiah Award for the wild-eyed prediction.
Apology to Isaiah and Deutero Isaiah fan.
There's no Deutero Isaiah.
There definitely is.
Let's not go into this again. Oh,
tertiary Isaiah.
I'm not having this. No. Right, Jeremiah Award for wild prediction. It's got to be Hitchens, hasn't it?
That's got to be Hitchens.
He'll be very upset with us if he listens to this. Yeah. To be fair, he will say that
it's not wild-eyed.
It's not wild-eyed, no, but he's certainly predicting doom. So, yeah, Hitchens.
Okay, is that our answer then? Okay.
I think so.
All right, okay, fine. That's Hitchens. I have a feeling.
Ironically, and with greatest respect.
I'm just making notes of this. All right, Lazarus Award for greatest comeback. That's Lazarus, the man who died.
Well, yeah, I know who Lazarus is, Jamie.
I know. I'm for the listeners. I know you do. So I tell you. Can I tell you someone who it's not?
Go on.
It's Matt Hancock.
Well, I mean, Matt Hancock's attempts to Lazarus are getting quite desperate now, aren't they? I mean,
well, this is something I put in a different category called.
But we can put it in there, can't we?
So Matt Hancock loses the whip after joining I'm a Celebrity lineup. So the whip's been taken away from him, and apparently it's because he was so upset that he wasn't in the new cabinet that he's taken it out on his. On who? I mean, Rishi Sunak, presumably by joining the I'm a Celebrity crowd, and he has had the whip taken away from him. This is a cover your ears if you've got a sensitive sensibility. But it says here, in Mr. Hancock's West Suffolk constituency, Andy Drummond, the local Conservative Association deputy chairman, said, "I'm looking forward to him eating a kangaroo's penis." Quote me. You can quote me on that. A political ally of Matt Hancock's defended his decision to appear on the show, saying, "I'm a Celeb is the most watched show on TV. Matt doesn't expect to serve in government again, so it's an incredible opportunity for him to engage with the 12 million Brits who tune in every single night." To 12 million?
As if we haven't suffered enough.
The 12 million people watch I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here every night.
Probably.
That's like a fifth of the population or something. That's great. That can't be true.
But I mean, it's been a sort of graveyard of failed politicians for a while now, hasn't it? Because didn't George Galloway go on it? Do I mean Galloway?
Yeah,
I did. He was on it, wasn't he? And was Livingston on it as well?
Yeah. There's also Hancock also has a book.
Nadine Dorris is on it.
Oh yeah. Hancock has a book out as well called The Pandemic Diaries. And it says the inside story of Britain's battle against COVID, and the cover has him kind of looking to the left into the middle distance, and all these kind of this sort of notepad with those scrawled notes on it in the background, and it makes it look like the cover of that film. How I imagine the cover of that film looks, A Beautiful Mind. Like Hancock has kind of been scribbling these genius solutions to COVID, and it's sort of one man's genius. Fight against the COVID virus, but that's one to just put that in a stocking at Christmas, because people are gonna love that. Matt Hancock Pandemic Diaries. So so there you go. So Matt Hancock, definitely not Lazarus. Have we had any comebacks? Could it be Jeremy Hunt or? I mean, he's done quite well, hasn't he? I mean, we don't have to like this comeback. It doesn't have to be a comeback we support. So should we go for Hunt?
Go on them.
All right. Okay.
He's apparently a practicing Anglican.
Oh,
really?
Gosh.
It goes to midweek Eucharist in Parliament.
Really? Goodness me. Right. Well then, St. Paul Award for most unexpected conversion.
Well, I'd like to nominate here somebody that Calvin Robinson interviewed yesterday, Ollie Ollie London, who transitioned famously on YouTube. He's got a huge following on YouTube, millions. As a young man, he transitioned to being a woman and then to being Korean. He may have...
I think it's the other way around, isn't it? He transitioned to Korea. He decided he was Korean and had loads of surgery for his eyes. Then he decided he was non-binary, and then he decided he's a woman.
And he's given that all up and talked quite profoundly, actually, about an experience of faith, and is now going to a Catholic parish where, if I've got the quote right, he said that in the end, what he needed was not so much acceptance, but redemption.
Yeah.
You know, the torments that he had put that were inside his head could be best addressed through faith. And it was quite a grueling interview, actually, in terms of, you know, as a parent, you kind of listen to that and think, gosh, there could go any of our children in this age. And here's someone who had 42 operations.
Yeah, amazing.
And in the end has found what he was looking for through, you know, the word and sacraments.
Through Christ, yeah.
It was amazing. And, you know, and what we should be aware of is that this person is now going to get the kickback.
Yeah.
From
hold them in your prayers. Hold Ollie.
Progressives is going to be absolutely horrific. And he's going to find it difficult, even in a loving church, to fit in. You know, so you know, this is somebody who's truly marginalised.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think we should keep him in our prayers as spiritual fathers. You know.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Praise the Lord. Elijah Award for speaking truth to power. Again, I don't want to suggest anyone. What do you think? Elijah Award for speaking truth to power. Who's it going to be?
Well, I was going to say Calvin Robinson for his GB Common Sense show on Sunday afternoons, you know, with 250,000 followers on Twitter, in his dog collar, and sometimes his band things, you know, around his neck, preaching bands, and, you know, part of the Free Church of England, which, you know, is surely to the chagrin of those of us who are in the Church of England. But you know, he's using an opportunity here that is brilliant, and Wyatt Morvick is doing this.
Well, yeah. Is it really speaking the truth to power what he's doing though, Daniel? I mean, I'm thinking more of a kind of like somebody sort of like in the face of somebody in power. You know, I mean, there's a difference. Do you see what I'm saying between broadcasting views and speaking the truth to power? I don't know. What do you think, Tom?
Well, he certainly spoke truth to the Bishop of London,
right?
To her face. I mean, I think they, in the interviews that they gave her, I mean, he's held his guns there, hasn't he? He's held his line. He hasn't compromised. I don't know. I think he's a good shout.
All right.
For it.
Okay. Well, we'll put Calvin in there then. Calvin Robinson, speaking truth to power. Okay. Methuselah Award for Elder Statesman.
With David Frost, isn't it?
Is it? But like, again, I don't want to question your answer, but Methuselah obviously is a very old man, and that, you know, Frosty isn't. He's not that old, is he? He's sort of more middle aged, so he might find that offensive. What do you think?
Give it to Joe Biden if you want to give it to someone who's decrepit.
Joe Biden, yeah, but
Biden, that's the one.
I'm just trying to make the game mean something. All right, fine. We'll give it to Lord Frost. Offended. All right, okay. King David Award for Best Musician.
Ooh.
What do you think? This could be anyone. This could be. I'll tell you who I'm going to give it to. If neither of you have any ideas, I really enjoyed Dominic Frisby's performance. Not that I was at it, but I listened to the podcast at James Dellingpole's live event. Did you either of you hear that?
No.
He's very, very funny, Dominic Frisby, and he's got a particular song called "Hate Speech," which is just comic genius. I won't attempt to sing it, but it basically starts with him sort of ironically plucking his ukulele and relating a conversation in which he sort of presents a sort of seemingly like very, very reasonable set of political opinions to some kind of, hypothetical SJW. And then the hypothetical SJW kind of just goes crazy and starts accusing him of being a bit like a transphobe, a homophobe, a xenophobe. And then, he shouts, you're spreading hate speech. It's just very, very funny. So let's give it to him. Dominic Frisby. And finally, the Lamech Award for Best Trash Talk. Any ideas there?
What's trash talk?
Trash talk is when you sort of like, tell somebody else why they're rubbish. Why they obviously just, we don't do it because we're vicars, but you diss them, show them maximum disrespect. Any ideas? Oh, it's got to be something from Twitter, hasn't it? No ideas for best trash talk. Tom,
sorry, no, I have nothing.
Oh, man. Can I give it to myself?
Go on then.
I must at some point have talked some really good trash talk against someone.
I award myself. Spirit of Colonel Gaddafi, isn't it? I award myself as supreme title of Supreme General.
Yeah, exactly. Good. All right. Well, that's the end of the Irreverend Awards. It's a bit shorter than the last one because the last one went on for about 2 hours. And we don't want to make this podcast 4 hours long. So well done, everyone. I noticed that we haven't given a single award to a woman, which is probably going to annoy some people, and that's obviously just reflective of our deep unconscious bias, isn't it, that we wouldn't even consider women for any of these awards. So I do apologize that. I mean, one of the things we could have done is given the Elijah Award to Laura Dodsworth, couldn't we? That would have been a good shout. Similarly, Methuselah Award for Elder Statesman, that could have been given to Edwina Curry or someone of that ilk, but we didn't. So sorry about that. But they don't mean anything. They're just meaningless. It's just fun.
The category is not woman. Sorry, it could have been misinterpreted for a moment there.
What do you mean? Women. Oh yeah, no, the awards.
We could have had Stella Braverman at the moment
for what?
The Home Office for comeback. And she came back a week later after being sacked.
All right. Well, we'll give her. I mean, also
joint with Jeremy Hunt.
You could give that to. You could also give it to Rishi Sunak, couldn't you? I suppose. But anyway. So what I meant by meaningless, I meant that the whole awards are meaningless. I meant it was just a bit of fun, really. Just a way of talking about the thingy. All right. So let's finish up now. Just to say once again, please, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or in your podcast app, and share it with your friends, please. Yes. And another thing you can do is you can support the podcast. So if you go to irreverendpod.com, you can become a regular supporter on Patreon for a very, very low amount of money. It's almost free, £1.50 a month plus VAT. You can give more if you like to, or you can buy us a coffee on buymeacoffee.com/Reverend, and that's all on our website, irreverendpod.com. But it's really, really helpful if people do that, if you can. And I just have one notice that I said I would give, which I'll give again next week in case anyone misses it. But I'm going to just read this out. Classical education is making a comeback in the heart of England. The King Alfred School near Dudley, West Midlands, was set up to offer a classical British education based on reformed Christian values. You'd like that, Tom? And the great books of the Western canon, rated good by Ofsted in our latest inspection, which I believe was their first, by the way, so that's a very good result. The King Alfred School is looking for a Christian teacher to teach our combined reception and year one class. If you're a teacher who would value small class sizes, a beautiful and wholesome curriculum based on the cultural heritage of the Christian West, then the team at the King Alfred School would love to hear from you. Desirable attributes include genuine Christian faith, qualified teacher status, early years experience, maths and English, subject strength, as well as being musically and artistically gifted. So not much then, no pressure. Please apply by email to the head teacher at kingalfredschool@outlook.com or visit our website at www.thekingalfredschool.co.uk for more information. It'd be great if it could be through a reverend that the King Alfred School get their new teacher. I'd be really, really pleased about that. So, chaps, come to the end of the 100th episode. Do you have any? We should pray in a minute. We'll do the Lord's Prayer, shall we? But do you have any sort of like parting reflections?
Well, just say thank you to Peter for coming and joining us. It was fascinating. It was interesting. I don't know if he listened to this episode or share it, but I
would suspect not.
Suspect not, but who knows?
Maybe he's still listening.
He normally sort of shares his chats with Rory Graham, doesn't he, on his Twitter, etc.
Mike, do you mean Mike Graham?
I do, yeah.
Who's Rory Graham?
No idea. just plucked a name out of my head.
Excellent.
Went together quite well. Anyway, but thanks for joining us, and it was certainly fascinating.
Yep. Daniel, last words.
And thanks to all our listeners for staying with us for 100 episodes. And here's the next 100.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that's what I want to say. Thank you so much to everyone who supported the show. I mean, it's amazing. It really is. It's been an incredible journey thus far. And I really get the sense, chaps, that it's only just getting going. So, here we go. Be excited for the future, everyone, even given, the economic collapse and the breakdown of the fabric of society. And so the podcast going well. So that's good, isn't it? So we can all be really positive about that. Seriously though, let's do a prayer to finish, shall we? Who wants to do it? Shall I?
Go on then, Jamie.
Since no one's volunteering. Okay, let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Chaps, thank you as always for your time. It's been great to record this episode with you, and looking forward to 101 now. So we could all dress up as Dalmatians. That'll make my son really happy. He loves 101 Dalmatians. So we're not going to do that, really. That's not going to happen. Okay. All right. Well, bye everyone.
Goodbye.
Look forward to being with you next time. Bye.